The haunting scream echoed through the dusty streets of Ordway, Colorado, stopping Caleb Winters in his tracks as he led his horse toward the livery stable. It was 1878, and the small town nestled on the eastern plains had seen its share of trouble, but something about that desperate cry made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He'd ridden into town just an hour earlier, weary from the cattle drive that had taken him from Texas to Colorado, but exhaustion vanished in an instant as another scream pierced the evening air. Faith Madigan clawed at the rough wooden door until her fingernails cracked and bled. 3 days she'd been locked in this dank cellar beneath her uncle's house, with nothing but a bucket of water and stale bread to sustain her. After her parents' death 6 months ago, coming to live with her mother's brother had seemed her only option. How wrong she had been. Uncle Vernon had seemed kind enough at first, but his true nature emerged after he discovered her father's gold pocket watch among her belongings, the only item of value she owned. "That'll fetch a fine price," he'd said with gleaming eyes. When she refused to let him sell it, her last connection to her father, he'd flown into a rage. That's when she learned about the cellar, a prison he'd apparently used before. "You'll stay down there till you learn some gratitude," he'd snarled, shoving her down the stairs. Now, Faith pounded on the door again, her throat raw from screaming. Her uncle had gone to the saloon hours ago, and desperation drove her to call for help, despite knowing the house sat at the edge of town, away from most neighbors. Caleb followed the sound, hand resting on his Colt revolver. The screams led him to a weathered 2-story house with peeling white paint. A neglected garden surrounded it, and the gates swung loose on broken hinges. As he approached cautiously, another cry, weaker this time, emanated from somewhere below ground level. "Hello," he called out. "Is someone there?" Faith froze at the unfamiliar voice. "Help me," she cried, her voice breaking. "Please, I'm locked in the cellar." Caleb spotted the slanted cellar doors at the side of the house. A heavy padlock secured them. "Hold on," he shouted. "I'll get you out." He searched frantically for something to break the lock, finding a rusty shovel leaning against the house. With several powerful strikes, the lock's hasp splintered from the wooden frame. Caleb threw the doors open, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. "I'm coming down," he called, drawing his revolver as a precaution. At the bottom, he found another door, this one barred from the outside. He slid the wooden beam aside and pulled the door open. Faith squinted against the sudden light from Caleb's lantern. She stood trembling, her simple blue dress smudged with dirt, auburn hair falling in tangled waves around her pale face. Despite her disheveled appearance, Caleb was struck by her beauty and by the fierce determination in her green eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. "My uncle, he locked me in here. He'll be back soon." "Let's get you out of here then," Caleb said gently, extending his hand. "I'm Caleb Winters." She hesitated only a moment before taking it. "Faith Madigan." As they emerged from the cellar into the fading evening light, Faith blinked back tears of relief. Her legs wobbled after days of confinement, and she stumbled. Caleb caught her arm, steadying her. "When will your uncle return?" he asked, his voice hardening. "He usually stays at the saloon until closing," Faith said. "The gold nugget." Caleb nodded grimly. "You need food and water. Is there anywhere safe you can go?" Faith shook her head, despair washing over her. "I don't know anyone in town well enough. I only arrived from Boston 6 months ago after my parents died." "I have a room at the boarding house," Caleb said. "Mrs. Peterson runs it. She's a good woman. She'll help you while I have a word with your uncle." "No," Faith grabbed his arm. "Please, he's dangerous. He has friends in town. The sheriff drinks with him. I just need to get away from here." Caleb studied her face, seeing the fear and desperation. All right, let's get you to safety first. We'll figure out the rest later. As they walked toward town, Faith told him how her uncle had imprisoned her for refusing to surrender her father's gold watch, the only valuable she had left to remember him by. Vernon Madigan had always coveted his wealthy brother-in-law's possessions, and when Faith arrived with little more than a trunk of clothes and that watch, his greed had turned to rage. "He's been drinking heavily since I arrived," Faith explained weakly. "He resents having to take me in, though he was quick enough to claim my parents' money for my care." Caleb's jaw tightened. A man who locks his own niece in a cellar doesn't deserve to walk free. "At the boarding house, Mrs. Peterson," a plump woman with kind eyes, took one look at Faith and ushered her inside without question. "You poor dear," she clucked, leading Faith to the washroom. "A hot bath and a meal is what you need." While Faith bathed and changed into a borrowed nightgown, Caleb explained the situation to Mrs. Peterson. "That Vernon Madigan," she said, shaking her head, "always was a mean drunk, but to do this to his own flesh and blood." She looked toward the washroom door. "She can stay here as long as she needs. I've got an empty room next to yours." "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I'm going to have a word with her uncle." The older woman caught his arm. "Be careful, Mr. Winters. Vernon has friends in low places." Caleb nodded grimly and headed for the Gold Nugget Saloon. The saloon was crowded with cowboys, miners, and townspeople. Smoke hung thick in the air, and a piano player pounded out a lively tune. Caleb scanned the room and quickly spotted Vernon Madigan at a corner table, playing cards with 3 other men. Even from a distance, Caleb could tell he was intoxicated, his face flushed and movements exaggerated. Caleb approached the table. "Vernon Madigan." The man looked up, irritation flashing across his bloated face. "Who's asking?" "Name's Winters. I'd like a word with you, alone." Vernon snorted. "Whatever you're selling, I ain't buying. Beat it, Cowboy. It's about your niece, Faith." Vernon's expression changed, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "What about her?" "Found her locked in your cellar. She's safe now." Vernon slammed his cards down and stood, swaying slightly. "That's my property you're meddling with, mister. The girl's my responsibility." "Locking a woman in a cellar isn't taking responsibility," Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It's a crime." The other card players shifted uncomfortably, sensing trouble. One of them, wearing a sheriff's badge, stood up. "What's this about Vernon?" "Nothing, Sheriff Davis. Just a misunderstanding about my troublesome niece," Vernon said, attempting a jovial tone. "This cowboy's sticking his nose where it don't belong." Sheriff Davis looked at Caleb. "You new in town. Don't recall seeing you before. Just passing through." "Doesn't change what I saw a young woman locked in a cellar like an animal," the sheriff frowned. "That true, Vernon?" Vernon's face darkened. "The girl's been stealing from me. Needed to teach her a lesson is all." "By imprisonment," Caleb challenged. "She said you wanted to take her father's watch, her last keepsake." "She's a liar," Vernon spat. "Always has been." "Sheriff, this man broke into my property and took my niece. That's kidnapping," Sheriff Davis sighed heavily. "Look, Cowboy, Caleb Winters then. We handle family matters quietly in Ordway. Why don't you tell me where the girl is, and we'll sort this out properly?" Caleb stood his ground. "With respect, Sheriff, I won't be turning her over to a man who locked her in a cellar for days. She's safe, and that's where she'll stay until proper justice is served." Vernon lunged forward, grabbing Caleb's shirt. "You sanctimonious!" Caleb easily broke Vernon's grip and stepped back. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," the sheriff intervened. "That's enough, both of you. Vernon, go home and sober up. Winters, come by my office tomorrow morning. We'll talk about this civilly." Caleb nodded stiffly. "I'll be there. But Faith Madigan stays safe until then." As he turned to leave, Vernon called after him. "This ain't over, Cowboy. That girl's my legal ward until she's 21. The law's on my side." Caleb didn't respond, pushing through the saloon's swinging doors into the cool night air. He knew Vernon was right about one thing legally. Faith was her uncle's responsibility. But no law could justify what he'd done to her. Back at the boarding house, he found Faith sitting in the kitchen with Mrs. Peterson, a bowl of stew and a cup of tea before her. She'd regained some color, and her hair, still damp from bathing, hung in soft waves over her shoulders. She looked up anxiously when he entered. "What happened?" "Your uncle's at the saloon with the sheriff. I'm to meet with them tomorrow morning." Faith's face fell. "The sheriff will take his side. Uncle Vernon plays cards with him every week." "Maybe," Caleb admitted, "but locking someone in a cellar isn't something easily dismissed, even between friends." Mrs. Peterson patted Faith's hand. "Eat your stew, dear. You need your strength." Later, as Faith settled into the small room next to Caleb's, she couldn't stop trembling despite the warm quilt Mrs. Peterson had provided. When a soft knock came at her door, she tensed. "Faith, it's Caleb. Are you all right?" She opened the door a crack. "I keep thinking he'll come for me in the night." "He won't get past me," Caleb promised. "Try to rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do next." Faith nodded gratefully. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Caleb considered the question. "My ma raised me to believe a man's character is shown by how he treats those who can't defend themselves. I couldn't ride away knowing what happened to you." "Thank you," Faith whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No need," he said simply. "Get some sleep now." Despite her exhaustion, Faith slept fitfully, plagued by nightmares of being trapped in the dark cellar. When dawn finally broke, she rose and dressed in clothes Mrs. Peterson had lent her, a simple brown skirt and white blouse that were a bit large but clean and whole. Downstairs, she found Caleb already at breakfast. He stood when she entered, pulling out a chair for her. "Morning. How did you sleep?" "Not well," she admitted, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Peterson. "I'm worried about what will happen when you meet the sheriff." "I've been thinking about that." Caleb leaned forward. "Faith, do you have any relatives elsewhere who might take you in?" She shook her head. "My parents were only children and my grandparents have passed. There's no one." "What skills do you have? Could you find employment somewhere?" "I was training to be a teacher in Boston before my parents died," Faith said. "I have my certificate, but it's in my trunk at Uncle Vernon's house." Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "Ordway needs a school teacher. The last one left 2 months ago to get married." He glanced at Mrs. Peterson for confirmation. "That's right," the older woman agreed. "The town council's been looking. They've got a schoolhouse sitting empty and 20 children running wild." Hope sparked in Faith's eyes. "If I could secure the position, I could support myself. I wouldn't need to be under my uncle's guardianship." "It's worth trying," Caleb said. "But first, we need to deal with the sheriff and your uncle." After breakfast, Caleb walked to the sheriff's office, promising Faith he'd return as soon as possible. She paced anxiously in Mrs. Peterson's kitchen, helping the older woman prepare bread dough to keep her hands busy. At the sheriff's office, Caleb found Sheriff Davis alone, reviewing wanted posters at his desk. "Morning, Winters. Have a seat." Caleb remained standing. "Where's Vernon Madigan?" "Probably nursing a hangover," Davis said dryly. "I wanted to speak with you alone first." He studied Caleb. "You've got a reputation as an honest man. I asked around about you this morning. They say you drove cattle for the Goodnight-loving outfit. Charles Goodnight doesn't hire men he can't trust." "That's right," Caleb confirmed. "Been working with him for 3 years." Davis nodded. "So tell me exactly what you found at Madigan's place." Caleb described discovering Faith locked in the cellar, her condition, and what she'd told him about her uncle's actions. The sheriff listened without interruption. And the girl's staying at Peterson's boarding house now? Yes. She's afraid to return to her uncle's home, and with good reason. Davis sighed heavily. Vernon claims she's rebellious and dangerous, says she tried to stab him with a kitchen knife when he confronted her about stealing money. That's a lie, Caleb said flatly. She was locked in that cellar for refusing to give up her father's watch, her only keepsake, from him. Vernon wanted to sell it. Maybe so, Davis conceded. Vernon's no saint, especially when he's drinking, but legally he's her guardian until she turns 21. How old is Faith now? 19, according to Vernon's papers. He showed me the guardianship documents this morning. Caleb considered this information. Faith was training to be a teacher in Boston. Ordway needs one, from what I hear. If she secured that position, could she petition for independence? The sheriff raised his eyebrows. Possibly. The town council would have to approve her for the teaching position first, and Vernon would likely fight it. He receives a monthly stipend from her parents' estate for her care. So that's his real concern, Caleb said, disgust evident in his voice. Money. Probably, Davis admitted. Look, Winters, I don't condone locking anyone in a cellar, but this is a complicated situation. The girl needs to appear before Judge Wilson when he comes through town next week. Until then, where do you propose she stay? At the boarding house where she's safe. Davis hesitated, then nodded. All right. I'll inform Vernon that his niece will remain there until the judge arrives, but he has the right to speak with her, provided it's in a public place with witnesses. Fair enough, Caleb agreed, relieved that the sheriff wasn't insisting Faith return to her uncle immediately. As Caleb left the sheriff's office, Vernon Madigan approached from across the street. He looked disheveled, his eyes bloodshot from the previous night's drinking. "Where's my niece?" he demanded. "Sheriff Davis will tell you what's been decided," Caleb replied coolly, attempting to walk past. Vernon blocked his path. "You've got no right interfering in my family matters, Cowboy. Faith is my responsibility, my property, until she's of age." "She's a human being, not property," Caleb said, anger rising. "And imprisoning her was illegal, regardless of your guardianship." "She's unstable," Vernon insisted. "Dangerous, even. You don't know what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. "A man willing to abuse a young woman for financial gain." Vernon's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret crossing me, Winters. I've lived in Ordway for 20 years. You're just passing through." "Maybe so," Caleb acknowledged, "but right now I'm staying put. Faith deserves someone on her side." "She's bewitched you," Vernon sneered. "She'll do the same to others." "My sister, her mother, was just like her. Manipulative, deceitful." Caleb stepped closer, his voice dropping so only Vernon could hear. "Threaten her again and you'll answer to me. That's a promise." He strode away, leaving Vernon fuming on the boardwalk. Caleb's blood boiled at the man's attitude, treating Faith like she was his possession rather than his niece to protect. He'd known men like Vernon before, bullies who preyed on those weaker than themselves, hiding behind a veneer of respectability. When Caleb returned to the boarding house, Faith rushed to meet him. "What happened? What did the sheriff say?" "You can stay here until Judge Wilson arrives next week," he explained. The sheriff agreed it's the best solution for now. Relief washed over her face. "Thank you." "Did you mention the teaching position?" "I did. The sheriff thought it might be a way for you to petition for independence, but your uncle will fight it. He receives money from your parents' estate for your care." Understanding dawned in Faith's eyes. "That's why he was so insistent I come live with him after the funeral. I thought he was being kind, but he just wanted the money." "We need to speak with the town council about the teaching position," Caleb said. "Mrs. Peterson mentioned that Mayor Collins leads the council. His wife runs the general store. I thought we might speak with her first, get a sense of how to proceed. Faith nodded eagerly. Yes, I'd like that, but her face fell. My credentials and personal belongings are still at Uncle Vernon's house. We'll get them back, Caleb promised. The sheriff said your uncle has the right to speak with you, but only in public with witnesses. Perhaps when that happens, we can negotiate the return of your possessions. Mrs. Peterson entered the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron. Mayor Collins will be at Sunday service tomorrow. That would be a good time to speak with him and his wife about the teaching position. Perfect, Caleb said. Faith, do you have anything suitable to wear to church? She hesitated. My good dress is at my uncle's house. Don't you worry about that, Mrs. Peterson assured her. My daughter left some lovely dresses when she moved to Denver. They might need taking in a bit, but I'm handy with a needle. That afternoon, while Mrs. Peterson altered a blue dress for Faith, Caleb visited the abandoned schoolhouse at the edge of town. It was a simple one-room building with rows of desks, a larger desk at the front for the teacher, and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. Dust covered everything, but the structure was sound. He swept the floor and cleaned the windows, wanting Faith to see the schoolhouse at its best. When he returned to the boarding house, he found Faith on the front porch, reading a book Mrs. Peterson had lent her. She looked up as he approached, a smile brightening her face. Where have you been? You're covered in dust. Getting the schoolhouse ready for your inspection, he said, brushing off his clothes. If you're going to convince the town council to hire you, you should see what you're getting into. Surprise and gratitude shone in her eyes. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. He sat beside her on the porch swing. Faith, I know we just met, but I want you to know I'll help you through this however I can. She studied him, curiosity in her gaze. Why would you do that? Most men would have walked away by now. Caleb considered his answer carefully. When I heard you screaming, something inside me couldn't ignore it, and now that I know you. He paused. I admire your courage. Despite everything, you haven't given up. A blush colored her cheeks. I've wanted to. In that cellar, I felt so hopeless. But you kept fighting. You kept screaming until someone heard you. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. The moment was broken by Mrs. Peterson calling Faith for a fitting. As Faith stood to go inside, she impulsively touched Caleb's hand. Thank you for believing in me. That touch lingered with Caleb long after she'd gone inside. There was something about Faith Madigan that drew him, her resilience, her quiet dignity despite her ordeal. He'd come to Ordway intending to stay only a few days before continuing on to Wyoming, where another cattle job awaited. Now, he found himself reluctant to leave. The next morning, Faith emerged from her room wearing the altered blue dress, which complemented her auburn hair and brought out the green in her eyes. Caleb, dressed in his Sunday best, a clean white shirt, dark trousers, and a black string tie, felt his breath catch at the sight of her. You look beautiful, he said simply. Her blush deepened. Thank you. Mrs. Peterson worked wonders with the alterations. They walked to church together, Faith between Caleb and Mrs. Peterson. People stared as they entered. News of Faith's rescue and Vernon's actions had spread through town. Some whispered behind their hands, others nodded in greeting. Vernon was noticeably absent from the service, much to Faith's relief. After the sermon, Mrs. Peterson introduced Faith to Mayor Collins and his wife, Martha. So you're interested in the teaching position? Martha Collins asked, her kind eyes assessing Faith. Have you taught before? I completed my teacher training in Boston, Faith explained. I was about to take a position there when my parents died and I came to live with my uncle. We desperately need a teacher, Mayor Collins said. The children are falling behind without proper instruction. But there's the matter of your age and, well, your current situation. I understand your concerns, Faith said steadily, but I assure you I'm well qualified. If given the chance, I could provide references from my instructors in Boston. That would be helpful, Martha said. Perhaps you could come to tea tomorrow. We could discuss the position in more detail. I'd like that very much, Faith agreed. As they were leaving the church, Faith froze. Vernon stood on the opposite side of the street watching them. His gaze was cold, calculating. Caleb noticed her distress and followed her gaze. "He won't approach you here," he assured her, placing a protective hand on her elbow. But Vernon did approach, crossing the street with determined strides. "Faith," he called, his voice carrying across the churchyard. "We need to talk." People turned to watch, sensing drama. Sheriff Davis, who had attended the service, moved closer, ready to intervene if necessary. Faith straightened her shoulders. "What do you want, Uncle Vernon?" "Your belongings are still at my house," he said, his tone falsely cordial. "I thought you might want them." "I do," she agreed cautiously. "Then come home and get them." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "This foolishness has gone on long enough." "The sheriff said Faith can stay at the boarding house until Judge Wilson arrives," Caleb interjected. "If you want to speak with her, it needs to be in public with witnesses." Vernon's expression hardened. "I'm speaking to my niece, not you, Cowboy." "It's all right, Caleb," Faith said, placing a hand on his arm. "Uncle Vernon, I won't be returning to your house. But I would like my trunk and personal items returned." "They're your property," Vernon conceded. "Send someone to collect them tomorrow." "I'll come with the sheriff," Caleb offered. Vernon's lips thinned. "Fine." He turned back to Faith. "You think you can survive on your own in this town?" "Without family to protect you, I have friends," Faith said, her voice stronger than she felt. "And I'm applying for the teaching position." Vernon laughed harshly. "A school teacher? You've never worked a day in your life." "That's not true," Faith countered. "I was top of my class in Boston." "I'm fully qualified to teach." Vernon's expression turned calculating. "We'll see what Judge Wilson has to say about a 19-year-old girl living unchaperoned, working as a school teacher. Highly improper, if you ask me." "No one's asking you," Caleb said coldly. Vernon ignored him, focusing on Faith. "When you come to your senses, your room is waiting." With that, he turned and walked away. "He won't give up easily," Faith murmured, watching him go. "Not when my parents' money is at stake. How much money are we talking about?" Caleb asked as they walked back to the boarding house. "I'm not entirely sure," Faith admitted. "My father was a successful merchant in Boston. After the funeral expenses and settling debts, I know there was a substantial sum left in trust for me. Uncle Vernon, as my guardian, receives a monthly allowance for my care until I turn 21 or marry. That explains his determination to keep you under his control," Caleb said grimly. "We need to find out exactly what the trust entails. There may be provisions that could help you." The next morning, Caleb accompanied Sheriff Davis to Vernon's house to retrieve Faith's belongings. Vernon was sullen but cooperative, allowing them to take Faith's trunk and a small box of personal items. "This everything?" the sheriff asked. "Everything of hers," Vernon confirmed grudgingly. Back at the boarding house, Faith opened the trunk eagerly, relieved to find her clothes, books, and teaching materials intact. But when she searched for her father's gold pocket watch, it was nowhere to be found. "It's gone," she said, distress evident in her voice. "My father's watch isn't here." Caleb's expression darkened. "He's probably already sold it, or hidden it," Faith said, tears welling. "It was the last thing my father gave me before he died." "I'll speak to the sheriff," Caleb promised. "Vernon had no right to keep it." That afternoon, Faith went to tea with Martha Collins to discuss the teaching position. She returned to the boarding house glowing with excitement. Mrs. Collins was so kind, she told Caleb as they sat on the porch. She said the town council is desperate for a teacher and will likely approve my appointment provisionally, pending Judge Wilson's ruling on my independence. That's wonderful news, Caleb said, genuinely pleased for her. When would you start, if all goes well, next Monday? Mrs. Collins will speak to her husband and the other council members tomorrow. She thinks I can stay here at the boarding house. It's respectable enough, especially with Mrs. Peterson as chaperone. And if the judge rules in your favor, you could remain independent, supporting yourself as the town's teacher. Faith nodded, hope shining in her eyes. It would be a new beginning for me, a chance to build my own life. Caleb felt a pang at the thought of Faith settling in Ordway while he continued on to Wyoming. In the few days he'd known her, she'd come to mean more to him than he'd expected. Her courage in the face of adversity, her determination to forge her own path, these qualities drew him to her. Faith, he began, unsure how to express his feelings. I'm supposed to be heading to Wyoming at the end of the week. There's a job waiting for me at a ranch near Cheyenne. Her face fell. Oh, of course. You mentioned you were just passing through. That was the plan, he acknowledged. But now what? She asked softly. Now I'm not sure I want to leave, he admitted. Not with things unsettled for you. Hope flickered in her eyes. You would stay. Until the judge arrives, if you want me to. I do, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I feel safe when you're near. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. The town council approved Faith's appointment as teacher, conditional on Judge Wilson's ruling. Faith spent hours at the schoolhouse, cleaning and preparing lessons, with Caleb often helping her after he finished odd jobs around town. Working together, they developed an easy companionship. Faith told Caleb about her childhood in Boston, her parents' loving marriage, and her dreams of becoming a teacher. Caleb shared stories of his years as a cowboy, driving cattle across the plains, and his hope of someday having his own ranch. Why Wyoming? Faith asked as they arranged desks in the schoolhouse. Good grazing land, fair prices, Caleb explained. I've saved almost enough for a down payment on a small spread. Just need one more season. It sounds wonderful, Faith said wistfully. Having a place that's truly yours. It could be, Caleb agreed, watching her carefully. Especially with the right person to share it. Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to charge with unspoken possibilities. The peace was shattered the next day when Vernon stormed into the schoolhouse where Faith was preparing for her first day of classes. Caleb had stepped out to fetch supplies from the general store, leaving Faith alone. So it's true, Vernon sneered, looking around the classroom. They've actually given you the position. Faith's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. Yes, I start on Monday. It won't last, he said coldly. Judge Wilson won't allow it. A young, unmarried woman living independently, teaching children. It's improper. Times are changing, Uncle Vernon. Many towns employ female teachers, women with families, proper supervision. He took a step closer. Not rebellious girls who defy their guardians. Faith backed away. Please leave, I have work to do. You're coming home with me, Faith, now. This charade has gone on long enough. No, she stood her ground. The sheriff said I can stay at the boarding house until the judge arrives. Vernon's face darkened. Always defiant, just like your mother, she never knew her place either. Don't speak about my mother, Faith said, anger overriding her fear. Vernon lunged forward, grabbing her arm. You're my ward and you'll do as I say. Let her go. Caleb's voice rang out from the doorway where he stood with a crate of books in his arms. Vernon didn't release her. This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. Caleb set down the crate and moved toward them. I said let her go. Something in his tone made Vernon release Faith's arm. She immediately stepped away, rubbing the spot where his fingers had dug into her flesh. Sheriff Davis was clear, Caleb continued. Faith stays at the boarding house until Judge Wilson's ruling. The judge will side with me, Vernon insisted. I have the law on my side. We'll see, Caleb said evenly. Now I suggest you leave before I forget my manners. Vernon's eyes narrowed. You two think you're so clever. But I know what's really going on here. He looked between them with a knowing sneer. How long before the town realizes their new teacher is carrying on with a drifting cowboy? What will the council think of that, I wonder? Faith gasped. That's not true, isn't it? Vernon laughed harshly. I've seen how you look at each other. The respectable citizens of Ordway won't stand for such impropriety. Get out, Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. Now. Vernon backed toward the door. This isn't over, not by a long shot. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Faith collapsed into the teacher's chair, trembling. He'll tell everyone we're. Let him talk, Caleb said, kneeling beside her. People here are starting to see Vernon for what he is. They won't believe his lies. But what if they do? Fear clouded her eyes. I could lose the teaching position before I even start. Caleb took her hands in his. Faith, look at me. We've done nothing wrong. There's nothing improper between us. Though even as he said it, Caleb knew his feelings for Faith had grown far beyond friendship. Every day spent in her company only deepened his admiration and affection for her. Faith seemed to read his thoughts. But there could be, she whispered. Something between us, I mean. His heart hammered in his chest. Is that what you want? I hardly know, she admitted. Everything's happening so fast. A week ago I was locked in a cellar, and now you're about to become Ordway's schoolteacher, he finished for her, squeezing her hands gently. Focus on that for now. The rest will sort itself out. But Vernon was true to his word. By evening, rumors circulated through town about the nature of Caleb and Faith's relationship. Martha Collins arrived at the boarding house, concern etched on her face. I must speak with you, Miss Madigan, she said formally. Privately, Mrs. Peterson showed them to the parlor, hovering protectively nearby. I'll be direct, Martha said once they were seated. Your uncle is telling anyone who'll listen that you and Mr. Winters are engaged in an improper relationship. Faith's cheeks burned. That's absolutely untrue, Mrs. Collins. I believe you, dear, Martha said kindly, but perception matters greatly, especially for a teacher. The children's parents must have complete confidence in your moral character. What can I do? Faith asked desperately. Uncle Vernon is trying to ruin my reputation to force me back under his control. Martha considered this. Perhaps Mr. Winters should distance himself, at least until Judge Wilson arrives. His continued presence feeds the rumors. Faith's heart sank. The thought of Caleb leaving now when she needed him most was devastating. But she couldn't deny Martha's logic. When she reluctantly shared Martha's suggestion with Caleb that evening, his response surprised her. I won't leave you to face this alone, he said firmly. There's another solution. What? He took a deep breath. We could marry. Faith stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What did you say, marry me, Faith? His eyes held hers steadily. It would solve everything. Vernon would no longer be your guardian, the trust would transfer to your control. And no one could question the propriety of our relationship. But marriage, Faith was stunned. Caleb, we've known each other less than 2 weeks. I know it's sudden, he acknowledged. But my feelings for you are real. I think yours are too. Faith couldn't deny the attraction between them, the growing affection that made her heart race whenever he was near. But marriage, what about Wyoming? She asked. Your plans for a ranch, plans can change. Ordway needs a teacher. Maybe I could find work nearby. Or eventually we could go to Wyoming together. Faith's mind whirled with possibilities. I need time to think. Of course, Caleb said, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. It's a big decision. That night, Faith barely slept, weighing Caleb's unexpected proposal. She couldn't deny her growing feelings for him. In the short time they'd known each other, he'd shown himself to be kind, honorable, and protective. She felt safe with him, respected by him. But was that enough basis for marriage? The alternative was facing Judge Wilson alone, possibly being forced back under Vernon's guardianship for another 2 years. The thought made her shudder. By morning, she'd made her decision. She found Caleb at breakfast and asked if they might speak privately. On the front porch, away from curious ears, she turned to him. "If we married," she began carefully, "would it be a real marriage, or merely an arrangement to secure my independence?" Caleb's gaze was steady. "I wouldn't offer marriage if I didn't want a real life with you, Faith. I know it's fast, but sometimes life doesn't follow the path we expect." "No, it certainly doesn't," she agreed with a small smile. "A month ago, I never would have imagined being in this situation." "Is that a yes?" Hope brightened his eyes. Faith took a deep breath. "It is." "I'll marry you, Caleb Winters." His face broke into a wide smile and he reached for her hands. "You won't regret it, Faith. I promise." They were married 2 days later by Reverend Thompson, with Mrs. Peterson and Martha Collins as witnesses. The ceremony was simple and brief, held in the small church where they'd first spoken to the Collinses. Faith wore her blue dress, and Caleb had his suit brushed and pressed for the occasion. As they exchanged vows, Faith's certainty grew. This man, who had heard her cries and broken down the cellar door, who had stood by her against her uncle's cruelty, would be a good husband. Perhaps their beginning was unconventional, but their commitment was sincere. News of their marriage spread quickly through town. Vernon was furious, storming into the sheriff's office demanding the marriage be annulled. "It's a sham," he shouted. "They're trying to circumvent my legal guardianship." Sheriff Davis shook his head. "They're legally married, Vernon. Faith is now Faith Winters, no longer your ward. The trust money will be administered according to its terms," the sheriff finished. "If it's specified transfer to her husband upon marriage, then that's what will happen." Vernon's face reddened with rage. "This isn't over," he threatened before storming out. When Judge Wilson arrived the following week, he reviewed the situation and confirmed the marriage's legality. The trust established by Faith's parents would indeed transfer to Faith and Caleb's control, with Vernon no longer entitled to the monthly stipend. "However," the judge added, examining another document, "there appears to be a provision regarding personal effects that belong to Faith's father, specifically a gold pocket watch." Faith gasped. "My father's watch. Uncle Vernon took it from me." Judge Wilson frowned. "According to this, that watch was specifically bequeathed to you, Miss Madigan, or rather, Mrs. Winters now. It was not part of the general estate." "Vernon claimed he never had it," Sheriff Davis said, "but we can search his house with a warrant now." The search revealed the watch hidden in Vernon's desk drawer. When confronted with evidence of theft, Vernon finally broke down, admitting he had planned to sell the watch to pay gambling debts. "What happens to him now?" Faith asked as Sheriff Davis led Vernon away to the jail. "He'll face charges for theft and possibly for your imprisonment," Judge Wilson explained. "The territorial court will decide his punishment." With Vernon awaiting trial and the legal matters resolved, Faith and Caleb began their life together. The town council confirmed Faith's permanent appointment as teacher, and Caleb found work at a nearby ranch, returning to Ordway each evening to the small house they rented near the school. Their marriage, begun as a solution to Faith's predicament, deepened with each passing day. They learned each other's habits, preferences, and histories. Caleb discovered Faith's love of poetry and her talent for mimicking bird calls, a skill taught by her father. Faith learned of Caleb's childhood in Missouri, his mother's death when he was 12, and his dream of raising fine horses one day. As autumn turned to winter, their rented house became a home. Faith's teaching flourished, with parents praising her patience and creativity. Caleb's reputation as a skilled horseman grew, bringing offers of better positions from ranchers in the area. On Christmas Eve, 6 months after their hasty wedding, Caleb presented Faith with a small carved box. "What's this?" she asked, opening it carefully. Inside lay her father's gold pocket watch, now attached to a delicate chain. "I had the jeweler in Denver modify it," Caleb explained, "so you can wear it as a necklace if you like." Tears filled Faith's eyes as she lifted the watch, feeling its familiar weight. "It's perfect, thank you." "There's something else," Caleb said, suddenly nervous. "When we married, it was so sudden, so practical, we never had a proper courtship." Faith smiled. "We've been courting these past 6 months, haven't we, learning to be husband and wife?" "Yes, but I want you to know." He took her hands. "I love you, Faith Winters. Not just because you're brave and kind and beautiful, but because you've made me happier than I ever thought possible." Faith's heart swelled with emotion. "I love you too, Caleb. At first, I was so afraid our marriage was a mistake done for all the wrong reasons. But now I know it was the best decision I've ever made. Even better than becoming Ordway's teacher," he teased. "Much better," she assured him, leaning forward to kiss him softly. Spring brought news of Vernon's conviction. He was sentenced to 3 years in the territorial prison for theft and false imprisonment. Faith felt no joy at his punishment, only relief that he could no longer threaten her happiness. That same spring, Caleb received an unexpected opportunity. A rancher retiring to California offered to sell him a modest property outside Ordway at a reasonable price. With the funds from Faith's trust and his own savings, they could afford it. "It's not Wyoming," he told Faith as they walked the property, "but it's good land. Room for a house, horses, maybe cattle eventually." Faith surveyed the rolling prairie, the distant mountains, and the clear creek running through the property. "It's beautiful, Caleb, our own place just as you wanted." "Are you sure?" he asked, watching her carefully. "You love teaching." "The ranch is 4 miles from town," she smiled, a secret dancing in her eyes. "Actually, I've been thinking of taking a break from teaching soon anyway." "Why's that?" Faith took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to need a family home." Comprehension dawned on Caleb's face, followed by pure joy. "A baby, we're having a baby," she nodded, laughing as he lifted her and spun her around. "Careful," she protested, though she was laughing too. "There are 3 of us now," Caleb set her down gently, his face alight with happiness. "I never thought when I rode into Ordway last year that I'd find everything I ever wanted." "Neither did I," Faith agreed, thinking of the dark cellar where she'd lost hope, and the moment when Caleb had opened the door, letting in the light. Sometimes rescue comes in unexpected ways. They built their home that summer, a sturdy ranch house with plenty of room for children. Faith continued teaching until winter, when their son, James, was born on a snowy December night. 2 years later, their daughter, Elizabeth, joined the family. As the children grew, so did the ranch. Caleb's knack for breeding quality horses brought buyers from as far as Denver. Faith tutored the children at home until they were old enough to ride to the Ordway school, where she occasionally substituted when needed. Vernon, upon his release from prison, left Colorado, never to return to Ordway. The memory of his cruelty faded, overshadowed by the life Faith and Caleb built together, a life founded on a desperate cry for help and the courage to answer it. On their 10th anniversary, As they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching their children play in the summer twilight, Faith fingered the gold watch she still wore on its chain. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't heard me that day?" she asked softly. "If you just kept riding," Caleb shook his head. "No use wondering about that road. I did hear you, and I'll always be grateful that I did." "So am I," Faith said, leaning against his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "So very grateful." In the distance, their horses grazed peacefully, and the lights of Ordway twinkled on the horizon. From such desperate beginnings had come this life of love and purpose, proof that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found if one was brave enough to cry out, and someone else was brave enough to answer.